The wind howled through the trees, biting at the bones of everything it touched. It was a relentless wind, cold and unforgiving, swirling around the desolate stretch of road that seemed to disappear into the white horizon. The world blanketed in snow felt empty, uninhabited. Only the distant hum of an engine disturbed the silence as it droned along the icy highway, slicing through the snowflakes that drifted in its wake. Liam Carter's truck rumbled down the road, its headlights barely cutting through the thick fog that had settled over the area. He hadn't planned on coming out this far today, nor had he expected the storm to worsen as quickly as it had. Yet here he was, the only vehicle on a road that seemed to lead nowhere, a road as cold and empty as his heart. His grip tightened on the wheel, his knuckles white from the pressure. The frost that had crept up the windows of the truck reflected his mood, cold, distant, unable to warm itself. The rearview mirror showed only the ghostly images of the trees, their skeletal limbs swaying in the bitter wind. Liam's face was drawn, eyes shadowed by grief. It had been a year since Emily, his daughter, had died in the crash. A year of silence, of withdrawal, of trying to hide from the world that had become too much to bear. His wife, Claire, had left soon after the accident. The grief had consumed both of them, but where Liam retreated into solitude, Claire had sought comfort in the arms of others. She couldn't stay, and Liam couldn't blame her. The man he had been was gone, replaced by someone numb. Emily's laughter, once the soundtrack of their home, had faded into the background, leaving only emptiness behind. Liam shook his head, forcing the memories away. There was no use thinking about that now. The wind howled again, louder this time, as if reminding him of its presence. He turned the radio dial, but the static only intensified the silence. He glanced out the window, not really seeing anything, when something, a faint sound, caught his attention. A soft whimper, barely audible. He slowed the truck, his brow furrowing. At first he thought it was his imagination. After all, the storm had a way of distorting sounds, making everything seem distant, muffled. But there it was again, a soft, broken whimper carried on the wind. Liam's heart lurched. The sound, so fragile, so full of pain, made his pulse quicken. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, the tires skidding slightly on the icy surface. The engine died, and the world outside went eerily quiet. His breath misted in front of him as he stepped out of the truck. The cold hit him like a slap, but he barely noticed. His focus was on the sound, now growing more distinct, a faint, desperate cry. Liam's boots crunched on the frozen ground as he approached the sound. The wind cut through his clothes, biting at his skin, but he paid it no mind. His steps quickened, his heart racing, as the whimpers grew louder. He finally reached the edge of the road, where the snow had piled high against the ditch. There, huddled in the wet grass, were two small figures, barely visible in the gray light of the storm. His heart stopped. Two puppies, German shepherds, lay in the ditch, soaked through, their small bodies shivering uncontrollably. One of them whimpered softly, dragging its injured paw behind it. The other, a smaller pup, was pressed close to the larger one, eyes wide with fear. They were covered in mud and snow, their fur matted with grime, their bodies thin and frail. Liam crouched down, his hands shaking as he reached for them, his breath caught in his throat. "What in the world?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. How could anyone leave these defenseless creatures out here, abandoned and alone? He gently scooped the puppies up, one at a time, careful not to jostle them too much. They barely reacted, their bodies limp in his arms. The larger one, the male, trembled, a low whimper escaping his throat. The smaller female pressed her body against the male, as if seeking comfort in the only source of warmth she had left. Liam stood slowly, holding them close to his chest. He felt the weight of their fragility, their weakness, and something inside him, a flicker of emotion, shifted. He glanced around, looking for any sign of the person who might have left them here. The road was empty, no cars, no signs of life, just the wind howling, as if mocking the stillness of the world. "Don't worry," he whispered to them, more to reassure himself than the pups. "I've got you now." Liam's cabin was a small solitary place, tucked deep in the woods. It had been his sanctuary for the last few months, ever since the day he had retreated from the world. No visitors, no calls, just silence, save for the wind and the occasional sound of wildlife. It was a life of solitude, one that matched his mood perfectly. The cabin was quiet and small, but it felt safe, safe from the chaos of the outside world, and from the pain that constantly threatened to overwhelm him. The truck rolled slowly up the narrow snow-covered path that led to the cabin. Liam was quiet, his mind racing, as he glanced down at the puppies in his lap. The male, Zeus, had quieted somewhat, his breathing still labored but steady. The female, Luna, was still trembling, her body pressed against Zeus's, as though seeking comfort from the only source of warmth she could find. As the truck stopped and the engine turned off, Liam hesitated for a moment. The sound of the wind outside filled the silence, a harsh reminder of the storm raging on. But inside the cabin, there was warmth. There was peace, and he would do everything he could to help these creatures find some of that peace. He carried them inside, careful not to jostle them too much, and set them gently on a worn wool blanket near the stove. The fire crackled as the heat began to fill the room, but the puppies barely stirred. Liam moved to the stove and stoked the fire, adding a few more logs. The room filled with the soft orange glow of the flames, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. He knelt down beside them, carefully checking their injuries. Zeus's paw was swollen, and there was dried blood around it. The female, Luna, was thinner than she should have been, her fur matted and dirty, but she was alert, watching him with cautious eyes, her little body stiff with fear. Liam sighed, his heart heavy. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" he whispered. He reached for a cloth and began gently cleaning their fur, not forcing them to move, just letting them get used to his touch. The fire crackled behind him as he worked, the only sound in the otherwise still cabin. The dogs remained still, their eyes watching him, but neither of them made any attempt to move away. They were too weak, too scared, to trust him yet, but that would come. He knew it would. Days passed, and the puppies slowly began to heal. Zeus's paw had been bandaged, and though it was still tender, he could walk a little better each day. Luna, though still skittish, had started to venture out from the corner where she had initially hidden. Her trust was slow, but it was there, inch by inch, day by day. Liam, for his part, had fallen into a quiet routine. He tended to the puppies, making sure they were fed and comfortable. He cleaned their wounds, wrapped their paws, and spoke to them in a soft, soothing voice. Though they could not understand his words, they could feel the warmth in his tone, the kindness in his actions, and slowly, they began to relax. Marley, Liam's old bloodhound, had taken a gentle interest in the puppies. At first he had been unsure of them, too old to be bothered with anything new. But after a few days, he seemed to recognize their need for comfort. He would lay beside them at night, offering his warmth in the quiet dark. Liam had noticed the change in Marley too. The old dog, once lethargic and withdrawn, seemed to be waking up again, as if the presence of these tiny creatures had stirred something in him, something that had been dormant for far too long. It was in these small moments, Luna's hesitant first step toward him, Zeus's tentative wag of the tail, Marley's quiet companionship, that Liam began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days stretched into a rhythm. Each morning, the fire crackled to life, casting a soft glow throughout the cabin. The wind howled outside, but within these four walls, there was warmth, comfort, something that had been missing from Liam's life for far too long. He watched as Zeus and Luna grew stronger with each passing day. Their coats were thickening, their bodies filling out. They began to play tentatively at first, but their little games grew more lively as the days wore on. They chased each other around the cabin, tumbling over one another, their small bodies no longer fragile, but full of newfound strength. It was a sight Liam hadn't realized he needed so desperately. Marley, the old bloodhound, would sit by the stove, his eyes following the pups with a quiet amusement. He no longer seemed to mind their energy. Perhaps in some way their youthful exuberance reminded him of the days when he was younger, when he had been Liam's faithful companion in his own youthful days. It seemed Marley had found a reason to smile again, even if it was in his silent canine way. One night, as the fire slowly burned down to embers, Liam sat in his old wooden chair, staring into the flickering light. The puppies were curled up beside the stove, their bodies pressed together for warmth. The house was quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the occasional sigh from Marley. For the first time in a long while, Liam allowed himself to feel something other than sorrow, a quiet peace, a feeling he hadn't dared to experience in what felt like an eternity. Liam leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the armrests, and he gazed out the window. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a layer of white across the landscape that sparkled faintly in the moonlight. The world outside seemed still frozen in time. And yet, in here, inside his cabin, things were changing. He glanced down at the two puppies, who were nestled together. Their breathing was steady now, no longer panicked, no longer fearful. Zeus, the larger of the two, had taken to following Liam around the cabin, his eyes alert but trusting. Luna, though more reserved, had begun to approach him with greater confidence. She would follow him around the cabin, her small paws clicking softly on the wooden floor as she took in her surroundings. Liam smiled softly, his heart swelling with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. "You two, you're fighters," he said quietly, though no one would answer him. "I think you've taught me more than I could ever teach you." But despite this quiet peace, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The cabin felt fuller now, filled with the presence of the puppies, but there was a lingering sense of absence in his chest, a feeling he had learned to live with since Emily's passing. He stood up slowly and made his way to the small shelf above his chair. There, among old books and photographs, was a tin box. He opened it carefully, revealing a picture of his daughter Emily, taken when she was just a child. She was holding Marley as a puppy, both of them grinning ear to ear, her laugh frozen in time. Liam's eyes softened as he traced the edges of the photograph. "You would have loved them," he whispered. "I think you'd have taken care of them like you did with Marley." Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. There was no use dwelling on the past. Emily was gone, and all he could do now was move forward. But the tears, those fleeting moments of vulnerability, felt different now, less like a wound and more like an acknowledgement. The puppies, Zeus and Luna, had allowed him to feel again. They were not a replacement for Emily, but they had helped him remember that there was still love, still life to be lived. In their own quiet way, they had saved him. It wasn't long before the peace of the cabin was shattered once again. One evening, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a pale orange light over the snow, Liam's peace was disturbed by an unfamiliar sound. A vehicle, the low rumble of an engine, tires crunching over gravel. It was rare for anyone to come this far out, and Liam's heart skipped a beat as he instinctively glanced toward the window. The vehicle was approaching the cabin, its headlights cutting through the dimming light. It was a dark SUV, its silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of trees. Liam's pulse quickened. He hadn't had any visitors in months, and the presence of an unfamiliar vehicle stirred something deep within him. Zeus and Luna, who had been curled up near the fire, immediately stood up, their ears perked and their bodies tense. They began to growl low in their throats, the sound vibrating through the cabin. Liam's heart pounded as he moved toward the door, careful to keep the dogs from rushing ahead. "Easy, guys," he murmured, trying to calm them. They had become protective of him, and the sudden appearance of a stranger had set off their instincts. He reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, a knock came, sharp, insistent. Liam paused, the sound filling the silence. He opened the door cautiously, the cold air rushing in. Standing before him was a woman, her face sharp and unfamiliar. She was wrapped in a thick coat, her boots polished and new, far too clean for the rugged terrain that surrounded them. Her eyes were wide, almost too wide, as if she were on the verge of something. "But what?" "Hi," she said cautiously, her voice almost tentative. "I think you have something that belongs to me." Liam's brows furrowed. The tone in her voice made his gut twist. Something wasn't right. "You left 2 German shepherds by the side of the road near mile marker 72, she continued, her eyes flicking to Zeus and Luna. "I didn't mean to. I panicked, and I thought someone would find them. I didn't think they'd end up here." Liam's jaw tightened, his pulse quickening. "You left them?" he asked, his voice low, each word coated with disbelief. "You left them bleeding in a ditch. It was freezing. No food, no water, no chance. And you think you can just come here and, what? Take them back?" The woman hesitated, her posture shrinking as she took a step back. Zeus stepped forward, his stance protective, while Luna's growl deepened, a low rumbling sound filling the room. "I wasn't thinking," the woman stammered. "I know I made a mistake. I want to make it right. I want them back. I can take care of them now, I promise. I just didn't know what to do." Liam's gaze hardened. He looked down at the dogs, who had already made up their minds. Zeus bared his teeth slightly, while Luna stayed low to the ground, her body taut with the need to protect. "They found their family," Liam said, his voice cold but firm. "They don't belong to you anymore." The woman opened her mouth to protest, but something in Liam's tone silenced her. She paused, her eyes shifting between the dogs and Liam, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Without a word, she turned and walked back toward the SUV. Liam didn't move, his eyes following her retreating figure until the vehicle disappeared down the snowy path, the sound of its engine fading into the distance. As the wind picked up again, Liam closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. The dogs relaxed immediately, but Zeus came up to him, pressing his head against Liam's leg in a silent offering of support. Luna sat beside him, her eyes watching Liam with quiet understanding. Liam smiled softly, kneeling down to pet both dogs. "Thank you," he whispered. "You've saved me more times than I can count." Over the next few weeks, the transformation in Zeus and Luna was nothing short of miraculous. Their coats gleamed with health, their bodies strong and agile. They had become more than just companions to Liam. They had become family. The bond between them had deepened, unspoken but felt in every shared glance and quiet moment. Zeus had become Liam's shadow, always nearby, always alert. Luna, though still more reserved, had found her place beside him as well, her watchful eyes never far from Liam. Together the three of them made up a new family, one forged not from blood, but from loyalty, trust, and the quiet understanding that they were all healing together. The cabin, once a place of sorrow, now felt like home. There was warmth here, true warmth, born not from the fire alone, but from the bond they shared. The days passed, and with each one, Liam found himself feeling more alive, more connected, more whole. Winter had begun to fade, and with the arrival of spring, the world around the cabin started to shift. The snow began to melt slowly, exposing patches of brown earth that had been hidden beneath the frozen crust. The trees, once barren, now showed the first signs of life, small buds peeking out from their branches, promising a new season of growth. Liam stood at the edge of the porch one morning, his eyes scanning the horizon. The cold air still held its bite, but the gentle warmth of the sun made the thawing landscape seem almost magical. The light filtered through the trees, casting long, delicate shadows over the damp earth. It was the first time in over a year that Liam felt like he was truly standing in the present. The sound of paws on the wooden floor behind him caught his attention. He turned just as Zeus trotted over, his thick coat gleaming in the early morning light. Luna followed closely behind, her tail wagging gently. Liam smiled as Zeus nuzzled his leg, then looked down at Luna, whose watchful eyes never left him. "Hey, you two," he murmured, bending down to scratch Zeus behind the ears. Luna, ever the more reserved one, sidled up to him and rested her head against his knee. The dogs had settled into their new lives with him seamlessly, and the bond they shared had grown into something unbreakable. But just as Liam was beginning to feel the weight of the world lift from his shoulders, a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision. He turned, his heart skipping a beat as he spotted a figure moving slowly through the trees toward the cabin. It was a man. Liam's first instinct was to reach for the door, but the dogs reacted before he could. Zeus and Luna both stiffened, their bodies tense with alertness. Their growls began as low, rumbling threats, the kind of sound that filled the air with tension. Liam's eyes narrowed, and he moved toward the door cautiously. "Stay," he murmured, and the dogs obeyed, though their growls didn't stop. He opened the door slightly and peered out, his gaze landing on the man who had come into view. The man was in his mid-40s, dressed in weathered clothing, and his movements were slow, almost deliberate. His face was rough, his eyes hidden beneath a thick weathered hat, but it wasn't his appearance that caught Liam's attention. It was the unmistakable glint of a rifle slung over his shoulder. Liam's pulse quickened. His first thought was to retreat inside and lock the door, but something in him, the instincts he had honed in the past year, told him he couldn't let fear dictate his actions. "Who are you?" Liam called out, his voice steady, though his mind raced. The man stopped about 20 feet away from the porch, looking up at Liam with a strained smile. "Didn't think anyone would be out here, old man," he said, his voice thick with an unfamiliar accent. "Just looking for some shelter. Cold night." Liam's eyes shifted to the rifle. "What do you want with my cabin?" he asked, his tone sharper now. The man shrugged casually, though Liam could see the tension in his posture. "Nothing. Just need a place to rest for a bit. Don't worry, I'll be out of your hair soon." Liam took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "This is private property. You've got no right to be here." The dog's growls intensified, their muscles tensed, ready to move. The man seemed to sense the threat in the air, but he didn't back down. Instead, he took a step forward. "I said I'm leaving soon enough. Don't make a fuss, old man." Liam knew something was off. His instincts screamed at him that this man wasn't here just for shelter. Something in his eyes was wrong, something Liam couldn't place. The dogs, as if reading his thoughts, shifted restlessly, still growling. Liam glanced back at Zeus and Luna, their stances protective and unyielding. He wasn't alone here anymore. He had a pack, and he wasn't about to let anyone threaten it. "I'll call the authorities," Liam said, his voice low but firm. "You need to leave." The man sneered. "Authorities," he said with a chuckle, his hand brushing the rifle. "They won't be here in time." Before Liam could react, the man's hand moved toward the rifle, and in that split second, Zeus lunged. The moment was chaos. The dog was a blur of fur and muscle, charging toward the man, his teeth bared. Luna followed instantly, her sharp bark echoing through the air. The man staggered back, stumbling away from Zeus, his rifle falling to the ground with a loud clatter. "Get off me!" the man shouted, his hands flying up in a vain attempt to fend off the attacking dog. But Zeus wasn't backing down. "Zeus!" Liam called out, his voice sharp. He moved forward, his heart pounding in his chest, and grabbed the dog's collar. Zeus halted immediately, his growl still low and menacing, but Liam held him steady, his breath coming out in heavy gasps. Luna stood beside him, her body poised, ready for any further threat. The man scrambled to his feet, eyes wide with fear, clutching the rifle to his chest. He backed away, looking between Liam and the dogs. You don't know what you're doing," the man shouted, his voice trembling. "I know exactly what I'm doing," Liam said, his voice cold as ice. "You need to leave now. I won't ask again." The man hesitated, then turned and fled into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. Zeus and Luna watched him go, their bodies still tense, their eyes locked on the woods until they were sure the threat was gone. Liam closed the door slowly, his heart still pounding in his chest. He glanced down at the dogs, who were now calm, their bodies relaxing, though their eyes remained alert. "You did good," Liam whispered, running a hand over Zeus's thick coat, then stroking Luna's head gently. The dogs wagged their tails slightly, as if acknowledging his praise. Liam exhaled slowly, his chest heavy. That had been close, too close. But now more than ever, he understood what these dogs had become to him. They were more than just rescued puppies. They were his protectors, his family. It wasn't long after the encounter with the stranger that Liam's life settled into a new rhythm, one that felt more natural, more secure. The dogs were his companions, his family, and together they kept watch over the cabin and the surrounding land. The snow had fully melted, and the once barren landscape had transformed into a lush green forest. Liam had started spending more time outside, walking with Zeus and Luna through the woods, watching them explore with eager curiosity. The cabin, once a place of sorrow, had become a home filled with warmth, love, and the quiet joy that only a family could bring. One afternoon, as Liam sat outside with a steaming cup of coffee, Zeus and Luna lay at his feet, their bodies relaxed but still vigilant. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the sky, and for the first time in a long time, Liam felt a sense of peace settle over him. The past, with its grief and its loss, was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to keep going. Zeus raised his head and gave a soft bark, looking out into the distance. Luna's ears perked up as well, and Liam followed their gaze. There, at the edge of the forest, he saw a small figure standing, watching them. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, his mind raced with the possibilities. But then the figure stepped forward, revealing the familiar face of the local veterinarian, Dr. Mason. Liam had known the doctor from his brief time living in the area. Before retreating to the cabin, he had come to check on the puppies' progress and make sure they were healing well. Liam stood slowly, offering a small, cautious smile. "Dr. Mason," he said, his voice a little hoarse. The veterinarian smiled warmly, walking up to Liam. "I heard about the puppies," Dr. Mason said, his eyes flicking briefly to Zeus and Luna, who stood at attention. "I just wanted to see how they were doing." "They're doing well," Liam said, his chest swelling with pride as he looked down at the dogs. "They're more than just doing well." Spring was no longer just a distant promise, but a full reality. The days were longer, and the soft hum of new life filled the air. Birds had returned, and the once muted colors of the forest were now vibrant with green. Flowers were beginning to push their way through the softened earth, marking the beginning of a season of rebirth. Liam found himself walking more each day, the soft earth beneath his boots, replacing the ice and snow that had once confined him. The woods around his cabin felt alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. The rustling of leaves, the distant calls of animals, the gentle warmth of the sun. For the first time in a long time, Liam didn't feel alone in the world. Zeus, ever the protector, walked close to Liam, his large frame a constant presence beside him. His once limping gait had long since healed, and he now moved with strength and purpose. Luna, more reserved, stayed a few steps behind, her keen eyes always scanning the woods. She had come so far from the trembling pup who had first entered Liam's life, now strong, alert, and fiercely loyal. As Liam made his way through the trees, he noticed how the bond between them had evolved. They had become an inseparable trio, each of them drawing strength from the other. Liam had started to see the world through different eyes, through the eyes of his new family. The dogs had helped him heal in ways he could never have imagined, teaching him the value of patience, loyalty, and most of all, love. Liam paused at the edge of the clearing, taking in a deep breath of the fresh air. His gaze swept over the woods and the small clearing ahead, where the wild flowers had started to bloom. Zeus and Luna were close by, their heads low, noses to the ground, as if they too appreciated the moment. A soft voice from behind broke the stillness. "You're a long way from where you were a year ago." Liam turned, surprised but not startled. Dr. Mason stood just inside the tree line, his tall frame partially concealed by the thick foliage. His warm smile softened the harshness of his weathered face. He had visited Liam before, offering his help with the puppy's care, but this was different. Liam chuckled softly, his eyes still lingering on the peaceful scene before him. "I guess I am," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd be here. Not like this, not with them." The veterinarian walked up beside him, glancing at Zeus and Luna, who had raised their heads at the sound of his voice. They seemed to recognize the doctor as someone who had helped them in the past, but they remained vigilant. "How are they doing, Doctor?" Mason asked, his tone both professional and genuine. "Better than I ever imagined," Liam replied. "Zeus has become quite the protector, and Luna's not the same dog she was when I first found her. She's got a confidence now." "Doctor," Mason nodded, watching as the dogs circled around Liam. "They've come a long way," he said. "But so have you." Liam's gaze turned inward for a moment, his eyes clouded with thought. "I didn't know how badly I needed them until they showed up. It wasn't just about saving them, it was about them saving me." The doctor's eyes softened. "It's funny how that works, isn't it? Animals have a way of filling the empty spaces we forget even exist." Liam looked back at the dogs. Zeus was sitting now, his head tilted slightly to one side, his tail wagging gently. Luna stood beside him, alert but calm, her eyes focused on Liam with a quiet trust. "They've saved me in ways I didn't even know were possible," Liam murmured, more to himself than to Dr. Mason. I've learned to care again, to live again." As the weeks passed, the bond between Liam, Zeus and Luna only deepened. The weather grew warmer, and the once barren fields surrounding the cabin transformed into an expanse of life. The thick forest had begun to come alive with new growth, fresh shoots of grass, vibrant flowers, and the occasional deer spotted grazing just beyond the tree line. Liam found himself spending more time outdoors, tending to small tasks around the cabin, but always with Zeus and Luna at his side. They became an integral part of his daily routine, whether they were accompanying him on walks or simply sitting with him as he worked. They were never far away. Their quiet presence filled the gaps that had once seemed too vast to bridge. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a golden hue across the landscape, Liam sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. The dogs were lying at his feet, their bodies relaxed, their breathing steady. Marley, the old bloodhound, had curled up next to him, his head resting on Liam's boot, eyes closed in peaceful sleep. Liam stared out at the land, watching as the last rays of sunlight caught the tips of the trees. The silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the evening breeze, and the distant call of birds returning to their nests for the night. He had found his peace. It had taken time, and it had taken patience, but he had finally found it. The deep, unshakable peace that came from knowing he wasn't alone anymore. The world around him had changed, just as he had. His grief, once so overwhelming, no longer ruled him. He had learned to live with it, to understand it, but it no longer defined him. It was part of him, a scar that would never fully fade, but it was no longer his whole story. Now his story was one of renewal, of healing. It was a story of love, loyalty, and second chances. Liam glanced down at the dogs, who were now resting peacefully by his side. Their eyes were closed, their bodies relaxed in a rare moment of complete calm. He reached down, running his fingers gently through their fur. "You too," Liam whispered softly. "You've taught me everything I know about healing." A low, contented sigh escaped from Zeus as if in agreement. Luna let out a small whine in her sleep, shifting slightly but never straying from her position by Liam's side. For the first time in a long time, Liam allowed himself to simply sit in the moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire, the quiet companionship of his dogs, and the peaceful stillness of the land. The pain of his past was still there, but it no longer weighed him down. It was a part of him, yes, but it was no longer his burden to carry alone. One day, As summer edged closer, Liam decided to make a change. The quiet of the cabin, the solitude that had once been his sanctuary, no longer felt like the place he needed to be. It was time to reconnect with the world, time to give back what had been given to him. The idea had been brewing for some time, but now it seemed like the right moment. He stood outside, gazing out at the land one last time, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. The dogs were near, as always, their watchful eyes following him as he took in the landscape. It was time for a new chapter. Liam had received a call from the local shelter not long ago. They had heard the story of the rescued puppies, how they had come from nothing, how they had healed, and how they had helped heal him in return. The shelter had asked if he would be willing to share his story with others, to inspire hope in those who were struggling with their own grief or isolation. At first, Liam had been hesitant, but as he thought more about it, he realized that his journey with Zeus and Luna had been about more than just finding peace for himself. It had been about learning to trust again, to open his heart to the world, to let others in. "All right," Liam said softly, almost to himself. "Let's go." Zeus and Luna trotted up to him, their tails wagging in excitement as they sensed the change in the air. Liam smiled at them, his heart light. Together they walked back down the path, the dogs beside him, his old bloodhound Marley trailing behind. They were ready for the next step, ready to share their story, ready to help others find the same healing they had found. The story of Liam, Zeus and Luna had come full circle. It was no longer just a story of rescue. It was a story of healing, of second chances, of finding hope where none seemed possible. As Liam walked toward the future with his faithful companions by his side, he realized that the greatest gift they had given him wasn't just their loyalty. It was the reminder that no matter how lost you may feel, no matter how alone the world may seem, there is always a way forward, a way to heal. And sometimes, it just takes a little help from those who are willing to love us unconditionally.